Hello and welcome. I'm Dana Bibi of the programs team at the Columbia Global Center in Amman. Thank you for joining us today for a reading and conversation with Etaf Rum. We are delighted to bring you a discussion of her debut novel, A Woman is No Man. The daughter of Palestinian immigrants, Etaf was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. She has a Master's of Arts in American and British Literature, as well as undergraduate degrees in philosophy and English. Etaf has taught undergraduate courses in North Carolina, where she lives with her two children. She also runs the Instagram account @BooksandBeans. A Woman is No Man is Etaf's first novel. It is a New York Times bestseller, chosen by Marie Claire as Best Women's Fiction of the Year, BookBrow's Best Book of the Year, and PopSugar's Best Book Written by Women of the Year. It also achieved the Goodreads Choice Awards finalist for Best Fiction and Best Debut, as well as being lauded by the Washington Post, Newsweek, USA Today, the Middle East Eye, the LA Review of Books, Arab News, Washington Book Review, Refinery 29, A New Arab, and many more publications. Her book is described as a powerful and mesmerizing novel that will take all your attention from the very beginning. Etaf's writing has been called by reviewers as bold as a drumbeat and a love letter to storytelling, as she accomplishes the high wire act of telling a story that feels both contemporary and timeless, intimate and epic. We're pleased to be involved and to have the opportunity to share this work with a broader audience. The global centers are hubs of Columbia University, currently in 9 cities around the world, that work with students, faculty, and regional partners to create opportunities for shared learning and research, and to deepen the nature of global dialogue on a range of issues. This book talk is our 4th in a series that features Arab authors to showcase some of the breadth and diversity in Arab fiction writing. We would also like to thank the Center for Palestine Studies and the Middle East Institute for co-sponsoring this event with us. A Woman is No Man is an unforgettable, heartbreakingly impactful story of 3 generations of Palestinian American women. Themes of family loyalty, reputation, stigma, secrecy, and shame masterfully intertwined with gender role expectations, sexism, domestic violence, freedom, and the role of literacy. Etaf evocatively captures the difficult reality of immigrant isolation versus assimilation, as well as the challenge of cultural continuity. These issues are so important today in the Middle East, in the Arab diaspora abroad, as well as in any society that favors patriarchal misogyny. This is a riveting and brave book that will linger in your mind. I would now like to hand over to Dr. Diana Abu-Jaber, our moderator for this conversation. Diana is a professor in the English department at Portland State University. She's also an author. And after parents asked her to recommend books about Arab American families, Diana wrote Silver World, a fantasy with an Arab American girl at its heart, and it's published this year by Crown Books Random House. Diana often writes about the intersection of food, family, and cultural identity. Her memoir, Life Without a Recipe, was described by Ruth Rakel as bold and luscious. The Language of Baklava, her first memoir, has been published in many languages and won the Northwest Booksellers Award. Her latest novel, Birds of Paradise, won the Arab American National Book Award. Her other novels include Origin, Arabian Jazz, and Crescent, which won the Before Columbus American Book Award and the PEN Center Award for Literary Fiction. Fencing with the King, a novel of intrigue set in Jordan, will be published in 2022. Thank you again to everyone in our virtual audience for being with us. Please do send in your questions through the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen, and they will be addressed in this webinar. Please join me in welcoming Diana.
Thank you, Dana. I'm very happy to be here and so excited to be able to talk with Etaf today. I was lucky enough to review A Woman is No Man for the Washington Post, and I've loved it ever since. So this is a really meaningful conversation for me personally. And I was hoping we could perhaps start with having Etaf give us a short reading. How does that sound?
It sounds great. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me. It's an honor, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. I chose a short section in the 100-page mark of the novel. For those of you who haven't read, A Woman is No Man follows 3 Palestinian women. Farida, who is a child of refugees who grew up in the refugee camps. Isra, her daughter-in-law. They have moved to America, to New York City, to Brooklyn, Isra is pregnant with another girl. And so this novel follows Farida, Isra, and then later Deya, her daughter, who is narrating the story. These are the three generations of women. So we are in Farida's section. This is a section that I chose. It was Farida's idea to not breastfeed Deya. Breastfeeding prevented pregnancy, and Adam needed a son. Isra obeyed her without resistance, mixing bottles of formula in the kitchen sink, hoping, Farida knew, to regain her favor. Farida studied Isra's swollen breasts, a certain guilt rising beneath her ribs, a certain memory at the familiar sight. Farida pushed it away. There was no point in dwelling on the past, she told herself. And it worked. 4 months later, Isra was pregnant again. On the car ride home from Dr. Jabir's office, Farida sat in the passenger seat. Beside her, Khaled tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, humming a melody by Kulthum. Farida had a full view of Isra in the rearview mirror, holding Deya tightly in the back seat as she stared out the window, watching a flock of pigeons peck crumbs on the sidewalk. Farida turned to face Isra. Didn't I tell you, Farida said? I knew you'd get pregnant soon if you didn't breastfeed. Isra smiled. I hope Adam will be happy. Of course he will, Farida said. But what if he doesn't want another baby right now, Isra said. Nonsense. Children are the glue that keep a husband and wife together. But what if, Isra paused, taking a breath. What if it's another girl? No, 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 Farida said, settling back in her seat. It'll be a boy this time. I can feel it. Khaled raised an incredulous eyebrow. You feel it? Yes, I can. A woman's instinct. Sure you can, he said, laughing. I don't know why you're still obsessing over sons, Farida. Alhamdulillah, we have plenty. Farida turned to him. Oh, really? She said. And where was this kindness when I was getting pregnant? Or did you forget the torture you put me through? He looked away, red-faced. Oh, now you have nothing to say, do you? Farida said. Bikaffi, Khaled said, fixed her with a glare. Enough. Farida shook her head. How could he be so insensitive after all these years, after everything he had put her through, after everything she had done for him, because of him? She took a breath and pushed the thoughts away. Farida understood her place in the world, the wounds of her childhood. The wounds of her childhood, poverty, hunger, abuse, had taught her that the traumas of the world were inseparably connected.
Do you want to take a break?
No. Okay. She was not surprised when and beat him mercilessly the tragedy of the Nakba bulging in his veins. Nor was she surprised when he married her off to a man who beat her too. How could he not, when they were so poor that their lives were filled with continuous shame? She knew that the suffering of women started in the suffering of men, that the bondages of one became battered her had they not been battered themselves. Farida doubted it. And it was this awareness of the hurt behind her to see past Khaled's violence over the years and not let it destroy her. There was no point in moping around. She had decided early on in her marriage to focus only could control. She ripped her eyes away from Khaled in the rearview mirror. Away from Khaled, and returned her gaze to the rearview mirror. Don't listen to him, she told Isra. Inshallah, you'll have a son this time. but Isra still seemed worried. Farida sighed. And if it is a girl, and it won't be, but if, God forbid, it is, then it won't be the end of the world. Isra met her eyes in the glass. It won't? No, Farida said. You'll get pregnant again. That's all. Isra was lucky, as if anyone had ever been so kind to her.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for reading that.
Sorry.
It's hard, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough section. The subject matter is tough, and I think it's a real testament to your talent as a writer to go into that place, that deep place, and to really bring out the unvarnished truth, the truth of your experience, and to make yourself vulnerable on the page is really, it's a powerful act for any writer. Just to set the stage a little bit for our audience, I think Etaf did a great job of breaking it out. There are these 3 generations, and what's remarkable to me about this book is that our author has compassion and a kind of generosity for all these characters, so that we get them in all their dimension. Farida, for example, when I first started reading the book, I thought, oh, she is just the typical mother-in-law, and I mean, I enjoyed it. I totally recognized it. I thought, oh yeah, here we go. I know this lady. There have been a number of these women in my family, and I thought I knew her. And then as the book progresses, you move into her and you give us her in her beauty and in her pain. And that's so much of what this book does so beautifully, is it helps the reader to understand where this behavior comes from, where the pain is, and where the beauty can be also. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for writing that. And I would love, as we start out then, if we could talk about what brought you to this book. I feel like all books have their own journey. They're almost like love stories when you come to the idea and it begins to grow and it flourishes and the characters take on their own lives, if you let them. And you have to have faith that this story will happen and unfold. And you have to have that courage to tell your truth and to let your characters speak their truth. So I wondered, Etaf, could you talk to us about your journey of coming to this book and how it came about for you?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind comments and for reading the novel in such an open-minded way and having sympathy for all of these characters. I really appreciate that. But in terms of my journey, I really stumbled on the novel, I feel, by a beautiful accident. I was going through a tough time personally. At the time I was teaching literature, and I was teaching mostly white stories, just the typical stories in the canon that you teach when you're teaching American and British literature. And a part of me was, as a Palestinian whose history has been erased, but also as someone who's born and raised in this country, to not see my stories or stories of women like me in the canon was very sad and frustrating to me. But that's not really the main reason I started writing. I was writing more, it was an accident. I was journaling. I was in therapy.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I was journaling and as part of therapy, and because I was in a dark place. And I realized that most of the things that I was writing about were about my childhood, about Palestine, about my heritage. I mean, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, but a lot of the things that I was so focused on in my journal was the sort of sorrow and pain that I felt that had carried on from Palestine to my parents and to me. And I really wanted to explore that. And I think journaling in this time in my life and focusing on that trauma, but then also being a teacher and teaching stories, I think those two together were the perfect timing for me to think, you know, maybe I should tell the story.
Yeah.
I'm educated. My parents came to this country.
Yeah.
I certainly have the ability to write. So maybe not a novel. I'd never written a novel before, but I mean, I could put sentences together. I knew how stories, I knew what a good story did. And I aim to do that for Palestinians, for Arabs, for women, really.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we're so glad that you did. You know, I think there's so much, there's so many places for us to look at in your novel, but I think one of the big issues that you've confronted and I think will strike a number of writers has to do with the question of breaking silence. Not only speaking up for yourself, but breaking through all the silencing that's happened in terms of suppressing Arab voices, allowing these stories to be told, to reach the mainstream media, and also taking risks in terms of the subject matter. About 40 years ago, The Color Purple came out, and Alice Walker, you know, portrayed these amazingly moving stories of these African-American women who were brutalized by the men in their community. And Alice Walker was attacked for telling these stories. She was blamed and scolded and told that you must not tell these stories because they make us look bad. And so there was this kind of attack on her and on the book, and this idea of breaking faith, that you have to join in, and everyone has to look good because we're under siege as the community. And of course, The Color Purple went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. So there you go. But as I read A Woman Is No Man, it occurred to me that in many ways you were taking the same kinds of risks, and you were stepping out there and you were claiming these truths. And I just had to ask you about that. Were you worried about going into this territory? Were you afraid? Was it spontaneous and then you thought about it later? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think to be very accurate, it was spontaneous at first. It was natural for me to go into the dark, uncomfortable territories because that's all I had seen.
Yes.
I had seen that was my reality. And it was just very natural for me to want to go dive into that dark, uncomfortable, the domestic violence, the women being treated as unvaluable, the obsession over sons, like that was my reality. The trauma of the Nakba, the trauma of, you know, these refugees moving to America and being immigrants, displacement, that was what I knew. So that was spontaneous. I did, though, after maybe about the first or second draft of the novel, I started getting really scared because I realized that I was painting a picture that was very dark and uncomfortable for people that were already discriminated against. Like as a Palestinian, as Arabs, we're already discriminated against. You see Arab or Muslim and you just think, you know, terrorist or whatever. The media has just portrayed us so negatively. So I was so scared that I would further these stereotypes by writing this novel or by talking about these uncomfortable truths, or this particular family. And I kept telling myself, This is a story of one family, 3 generations of one family. Not writing a story about all Palestinians. I'm writing a story about one Palestinian family. I had to keep reminding myself that, you know, I had to own this truth, regardless of how it made, if other people were going to take it as a misrepresentation of an entire community. I am not the voice for all Arabs. I am not the voice for all Arab Americans. And I found myself debating, like, should I go in and, you know, take some things out? Should I go back and edit the novel, take out the violence? But I couldn't, because for Farida, for Isra, for these characters, for women in these positions who feel powerless, I wanted to tell their stories.
Yes.
And I think I made it a point in my interviews, in my in book clubs, to say, this is not the single story of what it means to be Arab, but this is one of them.
Yes.
And these are uncomfortable conversations that we need to have.
Yes. Yes. You had a wonderful interview on NPR where you discussed this, and I love what you say here. You quoted Chimamanda Adichie saying the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And you go on to say, Arabs are stereotyped by a single story narrative of war, violence, poverty, extremism. And there I was telling a story that only added to these stereotypes. Why had I done that? Why had I told the story of a woman who'd been abused her entire marriage and ignored the story of a woman like one of my friends whose parents had pushed her to go to college to study abroad and who is now a doctor in her 30s, unmarried, with all the freedom in the world, you know? But you told the story that needs telling. You told the story that was crying out to be told.
It just felt truer to me personally. Not to say that one day I won't write the story of the girl in her 30s that was now a doctor with all the freedom, but it just wasn't authentic to my personal experiences. So I didn't want to write that.
Yeah, yeah. You have to speak to that truth. You have to speak to that internal place. And there's so little encouragement to do that. You know, in my family, I was raised to be good. That's a terrible thing for a writer. You know, we should never raise, especially women, we shouldn't raise our girl children to be good, you know, because it just ruins your art. You know, you can't speak because you're so worried about what the family will say or what the neighbors will say, or and then these stories don't get told. Along the same lines, I wanted to talk about the issue of social responsibility and how you look at that as a Palestinian American writer. We talked a little bit about this earlier, about an interview that I had read with a Palestinian artist who said that he felt that all artists from Palestine feel imprisoned by Palestine. And he was talking about the need or the impulse or the sense of responsibility to address the occupation and the brutality of that experience, and feeling like you aren't allowed the full palette that someone who is not living their life either in exile or under occupation might feel. What do you say to that? Do you feel imprisoned by Palestine? Is it something that feels confining? Is it something that feels just simply natural? What is your take on that?
I do feel imprisoned, not by Palestine. I feel imprisoned by the trauma of Palestine. And I've been thinking about that I've been thinking about that recently. So when I wrote A Woman Is No Man, obviously the Nakba is part of the novel. It's the trauma of the Nakba is what leads these characters in America to make the decisions that they make. And I remember telling my agent that I was scared that the book won't sell, like to a publisher, or that I'd find an editor or a publisher who wanted to erase that part of the novel, just like I've experienced being erased as a Palestinian.
Yes.
And I remember like writing, this is before it got sold to HarperCollins, before I found my editor, Erin Wicks, who's been very wonderful and has never tried to censor me. But I remember thinking like, I'm going to, they're going to erase my voice. They're going to erase my story. Like they're probably pro-Israel. They're not going to want to dabble in this political story. And I started being scared. But I think, and this is happening again too in my second novel, I turned in my draft before everything that's happening in Gaza right now, before all this has started. And it's very much a story again about me as a Palestinian, about the Nakba, about that trauma. And so do I feel imprisoned by Palestine? I think it'd be better worded by the trauma and by constantly feeling like I'm under attack as a person, as an artist, constantly feeling that someone wants to erase my voice. And, you know, if my art doesn't fit the political agenda, will it be accepted? Will it be shared? And, you know, at the end of the day, as Palestinians, our trauma is unacknowledged.
Yes.
That is really what is the most imprisoning to me, living with a trauma that is unacknowledged by the wider world and feeling every day that I will be silenced as an artist, as a human, as a mother. So I do feel trapped in that sense.
Yes.
How do I get my voice out there when I know that that no one is welcoming it?
Yes. Yes. That really is the question, isn't it? It's
yeah.
It's incredibly pressing and it's very urgent, and now more than ever, incredibly, that we are still encountering this. Have you ever felt pressure to silence yourself? Have you felt, since your novels come out, have you felt pushback or you know, that kind of move that you shouldn't be telling these stories?
I've gotten many positive DMs, emails about how much the book was necessary for them or for their daughter, for their mother. But of course, with anything that is dark, that tackles dark subject matters, of course, I've gotten emails or just messages, or not, I wouldn't say threats, but just condemning the work because it does paint Palestinians or this one Palestinian family in a negative light.
Yes.
Just like I'm sure you have gotten things, you know, like I think it's just as an artist that talks about things that are uncomfortable, you are going to receive that. In the beginning, I was very sensitive to it, but now I'm just prepared.
That's great.
I'm ready.
Yes. That's great. You kind of get ready in the process, you know. And it's something you can't sort of do ahead of time, unfortunately. You just have to keep going. You know, my husband says you have to write the next book because each book teaches you something, and then you go forward and you write the next one. And you keep trying to get to that truth place, that place where you're really speaking openly. Do you feel like writers have a social responsibility? Do you feel like, especially, you know, again, from the place of someone like a Palestinian American, someone who's bridging cultures and who has that sensitive connection to heritage, do writers owe their readers something?
Like personally, I feel like I have a social responsibility in terms of educating as many people as I can.
Okay.
I think of my place where I've gotten in life against all odds. My grandparents are still living overseas. Had my father not left the refugee camps and that in the Amadi and came to Brooklyn, I would not be here speaking with you. I would not have been educated. I would not have had the opportunity to write the story. So in that sense, I feel like I have a responsibility to do good. But in another sense, I do think that writers, especially writers from minority backgrounds, have this like burden on them unnecessarily that they have to like set the record straight, or they can only tell a certain type of story because there's not a lot of other writers doing that. So in like, to clarify, you know, if I was a white male writer, like no one reads American Psycho and thinks that all American college students are serial killers, you know, like there's no burden on that writer. That writer can be a little bit more creative, artistic,
yes,
experimental. And I do feel like minority writers do have this unnecessary burden, unfair burden, that they have to like set the record straight for their community. And of course they should try to, but it's also unfair because there aren't many Palestinian stories. So everyone that's reading the stories that are there, like from me, Hala Alian, all of these stories that are about the Palestinian community, they're looking at us as writers and thinking, you have to set the record straight. Right. But it's unrealistic. We're just writing these handful of stories. So I think there's a balance, if I'm making any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's another aspect to this that has been in the news a lot lately. You're probably following this too, is I don't know if you've read the novel American Dirt.
I haven't read it, but I've heard about it.
You know about it. Well, the question of the insider voice that for our viewers who may not have read it, it's basically written from the perspective of a Mexican character, but the author herself was not Mexican. As I understand it, she was Anglo-American. And there was a real outcry against this, a sense that she was taking something or usurping something by speaking from this other perspective. And I wonder where you kind of fall in this conversation, how you feel about this idea. I just read a novel that was written by a Jewish American that had Palestinian characters in it and spoke from the Palestinian perspective. And I really wanted to ask you about this. How do you feel about this idea? Does the writer have to have a certain, I don't know, inside perspective? Is it okay for writers to take on the perspectives of other cultures, or is that a form of theft?
It's a complicated question. Well, first of all, is the book that you read City of a Thousand Gates? Was that the novel?
Is.
Yes. Okay, I thought, because I read it too, so I wasn't sure if that was one.
Yes.
It is. I mean, for American Dirt specifically, I could understand the outcries as a writer, but more specifically as a minority, because I mean, asking me personally is a very difficult question because I'm a Palestinian. Like, I know what it feels like to be erased. Yeah. Would I want someone to come tell my personal story who hasn't experienced these injustices? You're already stealing my identity. Like, don't steal my voice. Yeah. You know, and so I'm very it's a biased opinion to ask someone like me because I'm an oppressed group. So my opinion is going to be different than if you ask Jane next door, who hasn't suffered any violences or injustices. Is it okay if I write this thriller and my character is white? She might not care. But if you're talking to minorities who have suffered injustices, and then you tell them that people that have not suffered these injustices are just using this trauma to benefit from this trauma by telling a story, I feel like it's very insensitive, and that we should give platform to our Mexican writers. Why don't we give our Mexican writers the platform to tell these stories? Why encourage groups that have not been afflicted by this pain to profit from this pain? It just seems very insensitive to me.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
No, it's a great response. And I think you really get to the heart of it, because it's not a level playing field. If an African American person wanted to write from a white perspective, I would say go for it. But when you switch it around, when you have those in power speaking from a disempowered perspective, it does seem to compound the theft. So
absolutely.
Yeah. It's something that it comes up a lot in my classes. My students are very sensitive to it, and they question themselves a lot in terms of their own writing and where the line is. How far are we allowed to travel imaginatively as writers and artists, and they want to be aware and sensitive to the experiences of others. They also want to have artistic freedom, and it's a very complicated question. So thank you for thinking about that. I think that was a tricky one to launch at you. Now this might be an olive tree question, so you just say so. But I'd love to talk about your experience as a woman artist and writer. The novel is so much about the lives of women, and so much about the struggle to embrace art and to embrace the artistic experience. And Deya, she is a lover of books, and she is drawn to reading and to the literary world. And I was thinking about how your characters are continually negotiating traditional values and artistic and creative ones, how they're always trying to basically move between these impulses to love their families, to please their parents. These are girls who are born into families that are, instructing them as to what the right way is for a young woman. And so there's always this tension between the traditional and the non-traditional. And I wanted to ask you about how you feel about marriage. Does marriage work for women writers? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it viable? What do you think about marriage? And you don't have to get personal.
Wow, what a deep question.
Sorry, I should have. I didn't give Etaf any of these questions ahead of time. So.
I've never actually thought about this question consciously. It's probably always in my subconscious. I would say, all right, to preface this, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, conservative Arab Muslim family. My parents, immigrants. Obviously, the number one thing they wanted for me as a girl was to get married, settle down, have children. Whatever else I wanted to do is fine. If I wanted to get educated, whatever, you could do that in your husband's house. The most important thing is for you to get married and have, like, that is the crown on top of that is what a woman does, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I knew this growing up. I knew that marriage, like whatever I did, like it didn't matter what I did. It mattered what my husband did. You know, like
Yes.
it didn't matter if I'm not going to be rich. My husband's going to be rich. I'm not going to have the career he is. And even if I did have one later, like he's the king. He's the king of the castle, right? So I think all of that obviously is a lot of tension. There was a lot of tension for me growing up because I thought that was wrong, especially seeing the powerlessness of watching the females in my life being so powerless.
Yes.
I automatically had a negative view of marriage, a negative view of motherhood, a negative view of the patriarchy. Like it was already there. There was a lot of resentment, but I wanted to follow that path. I mean,
Yes.
I wanted the obedience, like if you are obedient, you will be happy. If you're obedient, if you're good, you know, you will be loved. You know, that was just kind of like the mantra in my mind. So obviously, you know, I followed that path. I got into an arranged marriage. I had my children, my girl, then I made sure the next one was a boy, you know, whatever. Like I did what I had to do. The diet that you do, whatever. Like, you know, the perfect picket white fence and everything that you need to achieve. And this is really like the focus of my second novel. Really is this question that you're asking is marriage, like, is it a prison? But it's not marriage that's a prison. It's really the patriarchy that's a prison, because it's, to me, I don't think marriage is what confined me as a writer. What confined me as an artist or as a writer was the fact that women are only seen as caretakers. They are only seen as mothers. They are only seen. I think that's what confined me, because I was trying to succeed. I was trying to break the glass ceiling, but I also had to pick up my kids from school. And I also had to be at home with them. And I had to have dinner ready. And I had to make sure I looked good so my husband thought I was pretty and he didn't cheat on me. And I had to, you know what I mean? Like, you have to be the perfect woman, perfect mother, but then you want to be an artist. And I was struggling. I was trying to achieve both. And I did achieve both, but it was so exhausting. And I was very angry. I was the angry woman, because I just looked at the man and I'm like, well, how come you don't have to sacrifice anything to be an artist or to be a doctor or to work 24/7 and come home at night and tell me you're tired and you want to go to bed? Like, I was angry. So it's not marriage, it's the system, it's the misogyny, it's the patriarchy.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And you're a mother. And there's that. I mean, when I was in graduate school, I was told by my writing teachers that I could choose to be a writer or I could choose to be a mother, but I couldn't be both. You know, and they meant that very seriously. And I don't think they were saying that to the men. You know, I think that was something special that they saved, you know, for the women, the few women in the writing program. Do you feel like that's a significant issue?
Absolutely. I do. And it's so sad. And I actually had a conversation. This is probably a little personal, but I cried today to my daughter. She's 11.
Yes.
And I just woke up very emotional, like thinking about Palestine, thinking about my responsibility as a writer. I need to tell these stories. Yeah. And I looked at her and I said, baby, I need to write this scene right now. And I know you want me to play with you. You know, your dad's at work and I'm, you know, it's summer, my kids are off school. Who are the kids with mom? You know, mom has work to do, but dad needs the kids to be with mom. So and I love being with my kids, don't get me wrong, but I always feel like I'm choosing, what am I going to choose today? To play with my kids or to write, you know? So I had to apologize to her. I'm like, baby, you know, we had a fun day yesterday. We played all day long. And I know you probably want to play with me again today, and I'm crying. I'm like, I was like, you're a Palestinian. I'm a Palestinian. I need to write. I need to do this. And I'm crying. And she's like, Mama, I'm so proud of you. You're such an inspiration to me. I'm so proud of you. And it just made me cry. And I was like, okay, you play with your brother today. And I really need to do this.
Oh, I'm going to cry now. I have
But
a
I mean,
12-year-old. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's wonderful.
But I think she understands the burden of what it means to be a woman, because she sees me trying to do it all.
Oh yeah.
And she sees, I mean, her father is an amazing father. I'm just saying, she understands already at 11 that a woman is no man. She sees it. She sees it. And so I think she has a lot of respect for women and their resilience. And I hope one day she can appreciate that she doesn't have to choose. She could do both if she wanted to. She doesn't need to choose.
Yes. There it is. That's what we want to tell our girls. You don't have to choose. It's not a choice. Do it all. Do all of it. Come on. I love that. That's what a beautiful, beautiful answer. Thank you, Etaf. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions that have just come in, and I want to keep talking to you, but I think I have to share you a little bit. So let's see. Someone is a lot of questions about writing. What scene was the most enjoyable to write, and which was the most difficult? And there's a follow-up question. Do you have tips for writing about trauma? So.
Okay. Most enjoyable scenes to write were Farida's scenes, the grandmother. They were so enjoyable because I felt very far removed from her. You know, writing about Deya and writing about Isra, I felt like I was writing about myself or about my mother. Those are the hardest scenes for me to write, because it's writing about Isra especially, I cried every single scene, even if I had passed it 4 times already. I already know this scene, there's no reason for me to be crying. I'm still crying, especially her scenes where she's depressed, and she's really when Isra is really in her dark hours. I just felt for her, and it was very emotional. Writing about Farida, this tough, resilient woman who made sure that she saved enough money to get her family to America. Just her strength was very fun for me to get into her head, to think about all of these women that I knew back home in Palestine, and their strength, the trauma that they've suffered, and the strength and the resilience in these women was very fun for me to try to like capture in a very sassy way, because I think Farida is very sassy.
She is. Yes.
Any tips? That I would say, just focus, to just like don't run away from the trauma, like go inside of it. I think I spent a lot of time trying to like go up and tell like a universal story, when really like I had the easiest time going in and telling a specific story.
Yes.
So try to go into the very specific story instead of trying to tell a story about all Palestinians. Don't tell a story about all Palestinians or all Mexicans. Just tell this very specific story, and it's not going to fit everyone, but it's going to be easier to write, and it's going to feel more authentic.
Yes. Great answer. I think that's absolutely, get the details in there. What was the biggest challenge when you wrote this amazing novel?
I think the biggest challenge was what we talked about, the stereotypes, making sure that I'm not just confirming these negative stereotypes, that I'm giving life to the male characters as well. Like, it's not a black and white story about, victim and oppressor. Like, women aren't victims, men aren't oppressors. As we learn in the novel, the women were also oppressors.
Yes.
And the men were also victims. Like,
right.
It's not black and white. And I really wanted to capture that. And I think that was a challenge, but it was very important that I do that.
Yeah. You want to bring all the dimensions to your characters, make them alive. Now there are questions about the story itself. How did you research to write the write about the background of Isra, who lived in Palestine. Did you draw more from your family stories? Was it more imaginative interviews? What was your process there?
I really very lazy. This might sound like so lazy, but I really just drew. I mean, I
Yeah.
lived in Palestine for 2 years as a child. So I mean, I know Palestine, like what it smells like, what the trees look like, what the hills look like, I know that stuff. So I didn't really, the Dukkan and Ramallah, like going to Ramallah,
Right.
just knowing these things, like, I knew what they looked like and what they smelled like. But family stories really to get the background of Isra and to get, how she married Adam, just, listening to my mother, my grandmother, aunts, neighbors, just, using their experiences. And I think they were just inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great way to go. It's not lazy. That's how, that's what the true writer does, Oh, this is a great question. Okay. How do you, as a minority person, look upon the Trump era? Especially in terms of racism, discrimination, white supremacy. Thoughts on Trump?
I don't know. I will say I don't really have any thoughts on Trump per se, but
Or
I
the
will
era?
say that the era, I mean, as a Palestinian who's been erased, who's been whose family has been refugees, and who as a Palestinian have been tried to get erased since 1948. This era is no different to me than any other era. Like, I was a kid when 9/11 happened. I watched Palestinians in the Intifada, like on TV, kids getting killed, fathers protecting their son. Like, this era to me in America is no different. I mean, as a Palestinian,
Yeah,
is no different than, no worse. If anything, right now feels worse than ever. So I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that question. I don't think Trump has anything to do. So I have no thoughts about him. I have thoughts about Palestine, and I have thoughts about my family as a Palestinian.
yeah,
If
yeah.
that makes any sense.
Oh,
I don't know if that makes
absolutely.
any sense.
Absolutely, it does, and it shows you how much our position, our background influences how we come to these experiences. I think a lot of Americans felt that Trump was giving a mandate to racism in this country, but it was
I'm
really
like,
an American phenomenon.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
exactly. Like, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just very interesting to me because, racism has been happening in this country all these years. Like, one man didn't, yes, obviously, just because he's racist, but this tragedy is existing in our
Yes.
country, and for Palestinians, this tragedy exists. Like, yeah, do I dislike Trump for making Jerusalem the capital of Israel? Like, am I really salty about that? Absolutely. But like, as a Palestinian, I know this trauma and this tragedy happened way before Trump. So I
Yes.
don't tend to focus on one person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an ongoing, the struggle continues, and has
Yeah.
been in place for a long time. Okay, we're getting low on time. Maybe we can fit in a little bit more. How can a non-Arab support the Palestinian struggle against injustice? Any tips for allies, thoughts for people who want to help out?
Sharing our stories, donating, of course, when you can, but most importantly, sharing our stories. I think the number one thing for Palestinians is being silenced.
Yes.
And the most thing that could be helpful to us is to acknowledge our trauma, and let us speak, listen. Don't silence us, and don't pretend that this tragedy didn't happen. So I think that's the most important thing. Is, for me, a lot of Americans this past 2 weeks have come and shared their solidarity with Palestine, told me I'm sorry for what your people are going through. Just acknowledge the trauma and acknowledge that they are willing to listen and learn.
Yes.
That is such an important step, because for so long we've just been silenced, erased. So for I always tell anyone that asks how they can help is to just educate the people around you. Speak up at dinner tables. If you hear about this injustice, don't pretend it's not happening. Talk about it with people. Educate a person. All it just takes is for us to just share these stories and acknowledge this trauma. And if each person just acknowledges this trauma in their family at dinner, the trickle effect of that is momentous.
Yes, yes, yes. I think a lot of Americans are not aware of how intense and all-encompassing the silencing has been, and for how long it's been. The experience of the Palestinians, the mere existence of the Palestinians has been muted and suppressed. So that is a revolutionary act.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is asking, where did you get the lovely Palestine t-shirt?
Where did I get this Amazon t-shirt? I got it from, I have so many. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know which one is this specifically. But Dar Collective, DAR Collective online has a beautiful Palestine and t-shirts and sweaters. Dar Collective. I think you could also find, if you go to Subhi Taha on Instagram, he has links to, it's his clothing line. He has links to it. So his name is Subhi, Subhi Taha, and you can find him on Instagram. And Dar Collective has beautiful shirts for Palestine,
which we need. And that another revolutionary act. Go get your Palestine t-shirt. Go buy A Woman Is No Man and read that, and participate in the ongoing conversation, and speak up to people. Okay, Dana, I think we're running out of time here, and we looks like we've wrapped up on questions. I want to thank Etaf so much for sharing yourself and answering some really surprise questions. Thank you so much for writing this amazing book. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, for asking such insightful questions, for making me cry. It's really good when a conversation is emotional. I feel like it's very authentic. And I learned a lot just listening to you about just my responsibility as a writer, and what I hope the legacy of Palestine and telling these stories. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Please send me your novel.
Oh yes, I'm going to.
Okay.
Thank you, Etaf and Diana. We at the Columbia Global Center's Amman really appreciate the compelling and insightful conversation that you've both contributed to. There is a lot to take away from this that not only enriched our perspective, but also helped us understand different mentalities, expectations, and experiences. A recording of this virtual book talk will be available on our website and on our social media platforms. We would also like to thank once again the Center for Palestine Studies and the Middle East Institute for co-sponsoring. And we want to thank everyone who sent in the questions and our audience for joining us in our book talk series. Thank you.